Welcome to episode 165 of Informed Choice Radio, where I speak to James Wallman, author of Stuffocation.
For most of human history, the problem wasn't having too much stuff. The problem was, how can I find enough food to put food on the table to feed my family? If you had a second pair of shoes, you were lucky. Being materialistic is bad for you. If you're materialistic and you bring your children up to be materialistic, they will have worse relationships, because rather than thinking of their friends as just the intrinsic pleasure of a friend, they will treat human relationships much more about what can I get from this.
From Sundial House Studios in Cranley, welcome to Informed Choice Radio. This is the podcast all about achieving your financial goals in life. Here's your host, Martin Bamford.
There are a handful of books which have genuinely inspired me to live a better life. I've always thought that the measure of a good book is not how many times you read it or even recommend it to others, but how many times you gift it and share that wisdom. My guest on the podcast today is James Wallman, author of the groundbreaking book Stuffocation, Living More with Less. Stuffocation is one of those rare books that makes a lasting impact. It's regularly reread, and I'm pleased to gift it to my friends. James is a journalist, a trend forecaster, speaker, and author. He has written for GQ, the New York Times, the FT, and he's advised clients such as Absolut, BMW, Burberry, and Nike. James wrote the Futurology column in T3 magazine and was editor of the Future Laboratories forecasting publication. In Stuffocation, James shares intriguing insights on psychology, economics, and culture, resulting in a vital manifesto for change. The book has inspired those who have read it to be happier and healthier and to live more with less. In today's episode of Informed Choice Radio, I speak to James about defining stuffocation, the mental and physical health consequences of having too much stuff, some of the barriers preventing people from experientialism, buying things to facilitate experiences, whether the tide is turning for consumerism, and much more. You can find the show notes, full transcript, and useful links for this episode at icradio.co.uk. If you enjoy listening, please do say thank you to James on Twitter, where you can find him at James Wallman. I would also massively appreciate your review of this podcast on iTunes. Visit icradio.co.uk/iTunes to leave us a review, and we'll read it out in a future episode. Welcome to Stuffocation with James Wallman in episode 165 of Informed Choice Radio. I am delighted to welcome to Informed Choice Radio today James Wallman, author of one of my favourite books and possibly one of the most inspiring books I've read, which is Stuffocation. So James, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you with that very nice introduction. Thank you. I like the fact that you like the book. And it's, I gave up my job, and it was either build an extension on the back of the house or write a book. So it's always nice to hear that it's actually inspired people. Thanks.
I think you made the right choice, I've got to say.
Yeah.
Could you start by defining stuffocation for our listeners?
So stuffocation is the feeling that we've got. It's the feeling and the fact that we have too much stuff. We live in this magical time where we can have too much stuff. If you think about what life it was like for our parents growing up, or for our grandparents or our great-grandparents, especially, the further back you go, the more you realize that for most people, for most of human history, the struggle wasn't, the problem wasn't having too much stuff. The problem was, how can I find enough food to put food on the table to feed my family? If you had a second pair of shoes, you were lucky. Actually, I've had a pair of shoes, you were probably lucky-ish. But, you'd have Sunday best. You have this set of clothes you'd only wear on a Sunday, and they would probably be the only clean clothes you had. Now we live in a time where, thanks to the industrial and consumer revolutions and the success of consumer culture, that we've just become very wealthy and very lucky. And so we've ended up having, I'm not going to point any fingers, Martin, so I don't know how many pairs of shoes you have, although you just told me before the interview that you've got 3 children, so it's probably a lot of pairs of shoes in your house. But, most of us have more pairs of shoes than we need. We have toys that we don't use. We have clothes we don't wear. We have too much stuff. And I think we just got to the point. I think the reason the book title, which of course is a ridiculous made-up word, it works because when I say to somebody, I've written a book called Stuffocation, and they say, oh, what's that about? And I say, what do you think it's about? And the first thing they say is always, oh, right, suffocation. Oh, right. So, yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, I've got too much stuff. It's just this weird reaction that people have. But that, the word works. And I think the book has done well because it makes sense to me. We've got too much stuff.
What inspired you to write it? What was the journey that led you to leave your job and then make that choice between writing a fantastic book or building an extension?
There are two answers I give to this. And I think there's a technical answer and an emotional answer. Is that right? Technical answer? Anyways, yeah. There's a kind of I've been a trend forecaster since 2004. So since 2004, a sizable part of my business, and particularly from 2007 onwards, I was working out what the future holds. And of course, there's an element of nonsense in that. Of course, I don't know what the future holds. Otherwise, I'd be far wealthier than I am. But I use a way of working out the future, and I've advised businesses from the Absolut company who make the vodka to BMW to Zurich Insurance, helping companies understand what the future looks like so they can change their products and their positioning and their services and their business model in some cases so that they're more relevant for the future. And through that work, it became very clear to me that the world is changing, that what we're seeing is a move from materialism as the dominant value system to something that I now call experientialism. And what I mean by that is instead of looking for happiness and identity and status in material goods, we're finding happiness, identity, and status in experiences instead. And I just came to believe this, and the company where I was working were not as interested as me in this idea, I think partly because lots of the clients sold stuff, so it didn't really fit. And I felt this book needed to be written. And so I wrote it.
So is that the emotional answer or is that the technical answer?
Oh, no, that's the technical answer.
That's the technical one. What's the emotional answer?
Well, from a personal perspective, I've kind of bounced from, I guess, what I'd probably now call, I'd call materialistic to experiential jobs ever since I left college in 96. And, so I had some years where I had 1 year I earned about £5,000 in the whole year. I was a ski guide, a holiday rep, and just had a great time. And the year after, I was selling ad space for a living, and I would earn more than £5,000 in a week. And one of those was very much, as you can imagine, being a ski guide in the French Alps was just an awesome job where the focus was on skiing, and the experience of what I was doing. Whereas when I was doing the telesales, where I was earning, more than £5,000 a week, the focus was on how much money was I going to earn. And then I'd obviously go and buy stuff with that money. And I kept trying to work out what was the right thing for me personally. And then I had this moment of there was on the day that my grandfather died, he gave me a note, and it wasn't the kind of person that gave notes randomly, really. And in the note, it said a couple of things, and one of those was good luck, and it said that memories live longer than dreams. And what he'd said really stuck with me. It resonated. It made me wonder what he meant. It made me wonder if he knew he was going to die that day. And it's just one of those things I kept coming back to. What do you mean by memories live longer than dreams? And I've come to believe that I think what he was trying to do was answer probably the most important question there is: how should we live in order to be happy? And I think the answer that he was suggesting to me was that memories which come from experiences from what you do mean more than materialistic dreams.
Yeah.
So it's not what we have, it's what we do that makes us happy. So there was something that was in me from that note, and it kept on coming back to me. It's one of those things, I have it in one of those little cheap clip frame things on the wall. And I find myself thinking about it. So both from the technical perspective, I believe this is happening, but I also think it should happen. And, it's one of those things where I say it to them, of course, what I do is so much more important than what I have. But the thing is, the way we behave often doesn't reflect that true belief that we all have. We often find ourselves craving, coveting, and buying things because the advertisers tell us that's going to make us happy, and of course it doesn't.
How bad is stuffocation for our mental and physical health? I saw a clip of you being interviewed on The One Show by Chris Evans recently, and I think he suggested actually stuffocation could actually kill you, which is maybe a bit extreme. But is it really that bad for our mental and physical well-being?
That is an extreme way of looking at it, and but there's not enough research to be definitive, to say specifically that if you get rid of stuff, you will be happier. That statement, much though I'd love to make it, there isn't the science behind it. There is some suggestion in the scientific literature. Actually, no, there's a suggestion in all the anecdotal evidence of people who got rid of stuff, who feel themselves much more just light, because the problem is the more stuff you own, the more the stuff ends up owning you. But there was some research conducted by a couple of psychologists in Los Angeles who discovered, and this was particularly for women, it must be said, was that for women who had loads and loads of things in their house and talked about, the clutter and the clearing up and just the amount of stuff and how it was getting on top of them, these people had the signature pattern of something called cortisol, which is and it's the signature pattern they had that people have who have post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and a higher risk of mortality. So it's a little stretch to say too much stuff will kill you, but there's a suggestion in one small study. So again, what we really need to see to see is more studies and a meta-analysis of these studies, but longer term studies that show this link. But there's a suggestion in the scientific literature that too much stuff causes stress, and it causes the kind of stress that gives you a higher risk of mortality. So the Sun headline is too much stuff kills. The longer story is probably slightly more complex than that. But it's the stress that comes from stuff is really bad for you, and it's bad for your mental health. But you know what? Beyond the idea that having too much stuff is just bad for you, being materialistic is bad for you. And there is decades of research about this. There's a guy called, now I'm going to forget, he's at Knox University in the States, who studied this, Tim Kasser, psychologist in the States at Knox University, has been studying materialism for probably 20, 30 years. And being materialistic is bad for you. If you're materialistic and you bring your children up to being materialistic, they will have worse relationships, because rather than thinking of their friends as just the intrinsic pleasure of a friend, they will treat human relationships much more about what can I get from this. They will make worse decisions in life. So instead of taking a job, thinking about what is the experience of this job, how is my day-to-day life going to be, they will be thinking much more about how much money am I going to earn and what am I going to be able to get with that money. If you're materialistic, you're less likely to care about the environment. You're less likely to care about your wider community. And the thing is, community makes a lot of difference in terms of happiness. So there's a whole bunch of reasons. So too much stuff itself is bad for your stress. Stress can be really bad for your longevity and your well-being. And being materialistic, the attitude that's associated with the accumulation of stuff, is also really bad for your well-being as well. So the key message is get rid of stuff, but get rid of that. And this, I think, is where the book is different to all those other kind of clutter-free books. There are lots of books about, get rid of your clutter. If you get rid of your clutter, but you still think you're going to find happiness in the knickknacks you put on the wall and the things you put on your shelves and having that Louis Vuitton handbag or that, Duffer St. George coat or that watch by IWC, you're fundamentally looking for happiness in the wrong place.
What are some of the common barriers that prevent people from addressing stuffocation and experiencing this experientialism and this approach to enjoying experiences?
Oh, good question. Well, the biggest barrier is the way we've been socialized. We're consumers, and we are told by how many adverts is it we see a day? Thousands. There are 1,000 adverts that we see every day that make a very simple link. If you have this car, if you have this haircut, if you have this watch, you will be more successful, happier, more attracted to the opposite sex. You'll get a better job. You'll have more status. People laugh at your jokes, etc. Now, just to be clear, status is really important, and more people do laugh at your jokes if you have higher status. But it's just a lie. It's a bit like the Mussolini is always right idea. You know, if you're told something over and over and over again, you can't help but start to believe it. I'm thinking about buying a new pair of trainers. I need a pair of shoes. Mine are literally falling apart. And part of me wants to get a pair of Nike ones because they're really comfy. But the current pair I have are made by Nike too. But they're really expensive. And part of me thinks, wow, you know, I'm kind of conned into thinking that this very nicely made piece of plastic is worth almost £100, when actually I could buy a pair by a company that doesn't spend so much on advertising and creating the artifice that says that this is the aesthetic that I should have. And they would work perfectly well. So I'm a little torn at the moment myself. You know, so that's the first thing we have to get over that statement. But also, actually, I think it's worth thinking about the fact that for our parents, you know, for anyone born after the Second World War, the truth was materialism was a good idea. It was, you know, and we are, you and I, Martin, we are the incredibly lucky recipients of a life where we can grow up and we have central heating, and our life expectancy at birth is about, 80 or so, 82 for women, 79 for men. We have wall-to-wall carpets, we've got flat screen TVs, we've got all these magical things because of materialism, because the magic of materialism and the consumer culture was that the more that one person bought something, the more it gave somebody and some other people jobs. And that has created abundance where there used to be scarcity. So the thing is, the coveting of material goods and the buying of material goods until quite recently was a really good idea. It's only become a bad idea through, the problems with inequality. We're starting to identify these problems with these problems with inequality. There's the problem with the environment, of course, the huge elephant in any room of any conversation about what's going to happen with the world. And the other thing is about happiness. And in all fairness to the people that constructed this system, nobody knew that consumerism was going to be bad for happiness. It was only in 1974 that a guy called Richard Easterlin noticed, through some research that he conducted, that rising GDP didn't lead to rising happiness. I think before that, nobody knew that that was going to be the case. It seemed to make sense. You know, give people nicer stuff, give them more pleasant lives, and things should get better. It turned out they didn't. And so therefore, what we have today is this situation of stress and anxiety and depression, which is pretty unprecedented in human history, really, at the levels that we have it. So we've got this material well-being, but we've got this kind of, we call it a psychological scarcity. And so therefore, we need to do something about it. It's a classic, I see this as a really positive thing. Humans come across problems, and then what we do is we kind of tinker around and we mess about and we work out a solution, and then we move forward and we solve that, and of course we then find new problems, but that's okay. And I think that's what we're going through here, and I believe that this move from materialism to experientialism it's the logical evolution of capitalism, I believe.
Now, when I was reading the book, I think I identified what I term as a loophole, which was helping me to resolve my conflict between quite liking stuff, but also wanting to live a simpler life and not be bound by that stuff and have more experiences. And that was, if you buy something with the purpose of using it to have an experience, that's sort of okay. So is that all right? Does it still count as stuff if what you buy, and in my case, that's things like a kayak or a drone or something, is to facilitate an experience? Does it still count?
I thought you were going to talk about your bikes then. There are so many men who live in the home counties who they get a bike, they fall in love with cycling, and the next thing you know, they've got 6 of these things. And I say that because my stepdad's got, I don't know, he usually has about 6 bikes in his garage.
I've only got 2.
Okay. Well, look, I have 2. I mean, one is for going fast from one side of London to the other, and one is for taking my daughter to the park. Yeah. So that, they're practical. I'm not anti-stuff. I'm anti too much stuff and the wrong stuff. So look, I think you need to be really careful here, because I think one of the brilliant lies of our system is that you'll have enough time to play with all those toys you buy. So you'll think, oh, wow, that's brilliant. That's the thing I'm going to get. I mean, that's what Christmas is based on, right? It's giving people things that they use for a day or twice and they never use again. It's just a terrible waste, terrible for the planet, and terrible because, this is the problem with materialism. The problem is you buy that thing thinking you're going to get a lot of use out of it, and you don't. So, yes, if you're not buying nonsense things that are just about for the material value of them, you're in the right ballpark. So if you're buying something for the experience it's going to give you, but watch out, because advertisers are very clever. They're repositioning their goods to around the experience. And to an extent, advertisers have always done this. So just to be clear, it's not like there's been a sudden kind of shift, selling you on the experience of something. Porsche have done this incredibly well for many years. And that's one of the things you can buy. I mean, you could buy a flat screen TV because you want to keep up with the Joneses next door. You could buy the 52-inch plasma TV or LCD or whatever to sort of have the bigger one than the people next door to you. So some people see the TV as the thing that sits on its wall. Some people see it as the thing that they watch Frozen with their kids on, or they watch the rugby on, or the football. So I'm not anti things. It does sound, with a kayak and a drone, they're fun things to play with, right? The key is the first place to shop is in your own wardrobe or your own garage. Use the things that you have first and identify whether you are genuinely using them or not. And if you find you've got lots of stuff that you don't use, get rid of that stuff before you go buy new stuff. It'll free you up to, actually, that's the other thing. If you get rid of all the stuff you don't use, you might well end up using the bits that you really want to use. Do you see what I mean? Otherwise, you just go into a room and you're confused by it. How often do you use your kayak?
Oh, not enough.
How often do you use it?
Oh, I don't know, mate. During the summer a lot, so maybe a couple of times a week during the summer, but it sits in the garden during the winter. And
that sounds fine. Look, there are seasonal things. I don't know if you ever ski. If you ski, you use those ski boots once a year, but they're ski boots that fit, right?
Yes.
No, that's fine. Look, if you're using it twice a week in the summer, go for it. Yep. Enjoy your kayak. Good for you.
So more people are talking about minimalism. There's the tiny house movement in the United States. And we recently interviewed on the podcast my friend Michelle McGarr, who's finished a no-spend year. So she's written a book about the experience too, which is now out. Oh, fantastic.
We were on stage together at Cheltenham Literary Festival.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Do you think that the tide is finally turning for consumerism? Is there this growing movement now?
No.
No? Okay.
No, I don't. I think that with any kind of trend, what you get is if you think about a river, you get the flow of the river and you get eddies where it goes backwards, goes in a different direction.
Yeah.
And so just to be clear, I'm not a minimalist. And actually, I was interviewed by Lily Cole. Do you know the model?
Yes, yeah.
So she interviewed me the other day, actually a couple of weeks back, and they posted a video that they'd taken in my house. And it was kind of shocking because I think they had lots of pictures of, video of my house. And I'm surprised at how much. Well, we have lots of pictures that our kids have drawn all over our walls. We have quite a small little house. Anyway, the problem with minimalism is, for me, and this is a personal thing. I realise it works for lots of people. It's much more defined by what it isn't than what it is. That's what it feels like to me. I have, like, for example, if I was a minimalist, I couldn't have two bicycles. That just wouldn't work. I have, I don't know, I've probably got, I don't know how many hundreds of books I have. And I've got rid of loads of books, it's worth saying. If I've read a book or I'm never going to read a book again, I get rid of it. Apart from To Kill a Mockingbird, I keep that. But most books, I get rid of books now. But I've still got a couple of hundred books. I'm a writer, so something that I study, but we buy books, we enjoy books. So minimalism for me, I just can't see the mainstream people switching to radically fewer things. And to move on from minimalism to consumerism, I'm also not anti-consumerism, because the thing about consumerism is it's given us the magic of our lives today. So sort of coming out and saying, consumerism is a bad idea is great. But if you're anti-consumerism, I don't think you've got a right to use a smartphone, because a smartphone, think about, I don't know, you have a smartphone, I'm assuming?
Oh, absolutely, several, yeah.
Several. Now that worries me, Martin, as you knew it would. The magic of a smartphone is it does all those different things. It's a video to record your kids when they're in the school play. You don't need to take a video thing with you anymore. It's you can take pictures when you're on holiday. It's got your email on it if you have email on it. It's your diary. Obviously, it's your telephone. But the smartphone did not come from any other system than consumerism. It's thanks to people buying these goods and companies knowing they can make money that people bothered to create these incredibly magical devices. So people that are anti-consumerism are missing the point of the magic of our lives. And it's almost, if you say, right, I'm anti-consumerism, you're also saying, okay, we've reached the apex, the summit of where we're going to get to. Because you need consumerism to get the next generation version of things. If you look at the power of an iPhone, it's got more power in the iPhone than was in the Mac computer from about 10 years ago. These things are incredible. But also, we've become consumers. So if we're not going to be consumers, what are we going to be? Are we going to be some kind of, I don't know, I feel like it's people that kind of highlight the magic of the noble savage and think that we should all live in, very simple villages in kind of slash and burn environments in the Amazon or, villages in rural Africa kind of thing. And I think they forget the magic of our lives. And I think that the solution anyway is not to tell people that they're bad for being consumers. The solution is to switch their spending from material to experiential. If you switch your spending from buying, let's make this up. Let's say you've got 9 pairs of shoes and you've got a pair of shoes for when you go kayaking, you've got a pair of shoes for hiking, you've got a pair of smart shoes when you need to go to a wedding or an awards event or something, you've got a pair for jogging. You've got your, let's call it the 2017 essential set of shoes, okay? And then you see another pair of shoes for, I don't know, £150. Let's say they're beautiful pair of shoes and you really love them. And you think, wow, I really want to buy those shoes. Those shoes won't change your life at all. But let's say instead you go to Secret Cinema. Have you heard of Secret Cinema?
I have, yeah. I've never been, but I've heard of it.
Okay, well, you should go, Martin. It's a brilliant experience. And let's say instead you go to, so I went to the Star Wars one. It was my gift from my brother for Christmas the other year. And, we got to spend time in what felt like the Star Wars set, hanging out with stormtroopers and Yoda. And my brother and I got thrown into a prison cell with Chewbacca. Okay. It was just, ridiculous and brilliant and so much fun. And you should spend your money on experiences, not stuff. And the magic of doing that is you've still got money going through the economy. And we need money to go through the economy because it gives people jobs. And if we have jobs, it means that we can pay our taxes, which means we have money for the NHS. If we have jobs, it means we can buy things to give other people jobs, which brings prosperity. Do you see what I mean? So consumerism is a magical system that keeps money flowing through the system, leads to this wonderful thing called growth. Growth is a huge benefit for all its problems in terms of inequality. We don't have very many starving people in this country anymore, thanks to the magic of capitalism and consumerism and materialism in the 20th century. So I think we should continue down a path that we're on. We just need to change direction slightly away from the material goods towards the experiences, better for the environment. It's actually better for inequality by some interesting psychological trick. And it's good for prosperity as well.
Can we just finish by chatting for a bit about trend forecasting? So you've been a trend forecaster since 2004. You're a futurist. Yes. What are some of the future trends that are most exciting for you at the moment?
The experience revolution, experientialism really is the one that I think is, that's why I gave up my job to write this book. I think it's one of the most important socio-cultural trends of the 21st century. I think it has to happen. I saw this, an article the other day by a woman called Virginia Postrel, quite a well-known author and thinker in the States, who said that it's become a moralistic cliche to say that consumers have changed their spending from material goods to experiences, or words along, that's not quite verbatim, but something like that. And that's incredible to think that when I first started working on this and I'd give talks about this, everyone would shake their head. The reason I self-published a book at first, Penguin only bought it after it had been self-published, because everyone said no. Everyone said no. All the publishers in London, the publishers in New York, and like I say, when I gave talks, everyone said this was a nice idea, but it wasn't true. Okay. Now, it's my job to, as a forecaster, to work out what's going to happen next. And I felt there was enough data for me to put my head above the parapet and publish this book and say, this is what I believe is going to happen. And since then, there's just lots of data that's come out from the European Commission, the Bureau of Economic Analysis in the States, from the ONS over here, that shows that there is this, from all sorts of other people, from KKR, big investment firm based in the States, from Mintel, that illustrate that there is a move from material good to experiences. And this is, hugely positive.
So is trend forecasting then a case of spotting that data and being right before everybody else realises you're right?
That's how to make a name for yourself. is to spot something before everyone else says it's true. But what it's about is, so there's a guy called William Gibson, who's an author and essayist. He's a futurist, writes lots of cyberpunk books. And he once said in an interview in the early 80s that the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. And I think that's fundamentally true. So my job is to see where that future is and where is it's currently distributed. And the way I do this is using something called the diffusion of innovations. And it's a way of reading cultural change that was first codified back in 1962 by a sociologist called Everett Rogers, lovely guy. And he described, and he worked out, it was the index of his PhD thesis actually, he worked out that cultural change happens in a very similar way. And if you can picture this, Martin, on a graph with a y-axis and an x-axis. So the y-axis, the up and down one, is take-up or percentage, which could take up in terms of percentage or just plain numbers. And on the x-axis is time, starting at 0. If you can just picture that, the way that change happens, you start with a few people trying something out, then you get a few more, then you get, all of a sudden it speeds up quite a lot more, and then everyone else comes along and it kind of smooths off at the end. And that makes a smooth S shape. Can you picture that? I don't know if you can.
Yeah, I got that in my head, yeah.
And it turns out that's how change happens. And you get the first people on that far left, the beginning of the S, the innovators. They're the crazies. They're the wild ones. They're the people you know who... I'm trying to think. Maybe went to Bhutan 7 or 8 years ago. Maybe they went to Thailand in the late 80s or early 90s. Maybe they went, I'm trying to think of, maybe, you've got friends who will go to the latest pop-up restaurant serving Ethiopian, Brazilian, French fusion foods.
Yeah.
There's people, there's some people who are really into the absolute latest thing. And they're people who don't mind if it's rubbish. The thought to me of an Ethiopian, Brazilian, French fusion food place is just, oh, no, that's not for me. But, I'm not a food innovator. But there are people who will go along, probably because they go out for food a lot. Whereas there are other people who, go out for dinner once a month. They want to go to Pizza Express because they want to know what they're going to get and it's going to be nice. So then after that, you get the innovators, that early bit of the S. And then after that, you get what are called the early adopters. And it's at the mention of that term that everyone kind of goes, I know what you're talking about now. So the early adopters are basically the fast followers. They're the ones who, if you think in terms of fashion, you'll have people in Brooklyn, in New York and Shoreditch or Haggerston in London suddenly start wearing their trousers a bit shorter or not wearing socks or wearing their hair a certain way or wearing 50s dresses or something like that. So you get some kind of crazies doing it. And then a few more crazies will do it. And then someone who generally shops in, I don't know, Kensington or the King's Road or something will pop over there and see this and think, oh, that's a hit way to do it. I'll do it too. And those are the early adopters. I don't need to be kind of, give just simple examples that you can kind of picture. And then what you have is after that, and there's a moment there called the tipping point. Right. Malcolm Gladwell called it the tipping point. Yeah. But the social snowball, depends what it doesn't matter. And that's somewhere happens there where it kind of takes off. And then you get the early majority, late majority. And then as the S smooths out at the top bit of the S, those people are called the laggards. They're the people who even today only switch their mobile phone on to make an outgoing call. My stepdad, really. And so what I do is I spend my time thinking about and looking at what the innovators and the early adopters are doing. And if I think and actually the innovators are interesting, but it's when it gets to the early adopter phase that it becomes really interesting because you can see if it's going to take off or not. And you can see if an idea, which is starting to reach the people who, the others follow, is going to really take off and go into the mainstream and everyone else is going to do it. And I'll give you a couple of examples of two things I think are interesting at the moment. One is co-working. Do you have any co-working spaces maybe down in Guildford?
I believe there's some in Guildford, not here in Cranley where we're based, but yeah, I've been into a few before.
Okay, so first co-working space appeared in New York in 1999 and was identified as that. And it wasn't until about 2007, 2008 that these started to take off. And even then there was something like 40 or 60 or 80 or something like that. 2009, it was more like 100. 2010, it started to take off. And by now there's something like 10,000 of these things. So if you were to plot this on a graph, the kind that I'm talking about, you can see that co-working spaces are really taking off. And if you think about it, that's the other aspect. I mean, it gets a bit detailed if I talk about this too much. But as well as thinking about what the innovation is, what the new thing is, and whether it's taking off, is you need to think about the the conditions in which it exists. You need to think about the political, economic, socio-cultural, technological conditions, the demographics, what science says. Then if you think about co-working spaces, the thing that you need to make those things work is broadband, obviously. And you need, my brother works in one in Moorgate, and I work in another one in Shoreditch. And the reason it's possible for us both, and he works for an Australian company that's also based in Cambridge, is, the magic of broadband means you can have a Google Hangout and be in the same office as somebody else, but you just don't need to be in the same actual physical space. And the other thing is escape rooms. You've heard of escape rooms?
I heard someone, on Radio 2 the other morning, there was a child who was celebrating his birthday, and he was telling the DJ, I can't remember which one it was now, maybe Tony Blackburn, who's made a return. He was saying, I'm going to be locked in a room tomorrow, and it really confused the DJ until he twigged what he was talking about. So yes, it's not tried one, but it's an interesting development.
Escape rooms are taking off, and again, both in the UK and globally, these things, if you plot the numbers on a curve, they are at that point of takeoff on the S-curve. And in fact, I had a meeting with a guy from Brighton last week to talk about what he's doing with his escape rooms, which is expanding. Then a meeting yesterday with an extremely successful and quite famous in the marketing and communications world guy who is just launching a business on escape rooms. It's amazing. And they are... they're really compelling things, and there's loads of trends around them that make sense. Of course, other trends are technological worlds. AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning is going to be slightly more long term, but it's going to change our world.
James, thank you so much for joining us on Informed Choice Radio today. I really, really valued that conversation, found it really interesting too. Where can our listeners find out more about you, and most importantly, where can they buy a copy of Stuffocation?
Thank you, Martin, for asking that question, because I want more people to get this book. It has got to number 4 on Amazon. I'm very proud of this. It got to number 11 on the Sunday Times, which means that when I had a call from my guy at Penguin, he said, I've got good news and bad news. And I said, whoa. He said, the good news is you're number 11 on the Sunday Times list. I said, wow. He said, you've missed it by about 200 books or so. No. And he said, and the bad news is they only print 1 to 10. Yeah. So you're not a Sunday Times bestseller. Which was just the most surreal conversation. But the place, Amazon is an obvious place to buy it, but you can buy it in Waterstones or really bookstores. Yeah, we'll make sure we put links in the show notes. And to find out more about you, I know you have a website, which is The Future Is Here Now. The Future Is Here. So I run a forecasting business. I work with companies. I was with Disney. Sorry, this sounds like a plug, but this is kind of a surreal moment. I was with Disneyland Paris in December, telling them about the future of experiential content. Partly because, of course, my book's about experience. I work in the experience economy. I obviously know a fair bit about this. But if you think about that for a moment, Disney are the innovators. They're the purveyors. They're the pioneers of experiential content. They took movies and turned them into a real-life experience. So I felt like I was trying to sell ice to the Eskimos. And to answer, the company's called The Future Is Here, and the website is thefish.co. So it's thefish.co. Fab. We'll put that in the show notes too. Thank you for your time. That was brilliant. Have a good day. Thank you to James for appearing as a guest on Informed Choice Radio today. That was the longest interview we've published to date, and it was great to really get into some of the topics from Stuffocation, to learn about experientialism, and to also touch on trend forecasting. What was your favourite part of that conversation? Let me know on Twitter at Martin Bamford, or in the comment section in the show notes for this episode at icradio.co.uk. That's also where you can find useful links and the full transcript for this episode. Don't forget to say thank you to James on Twitter at James Wallman. Showing your appreciation to our guests with a quick thank you on Twitter is a really big help. It makes it much easier for us to secure more guests in the future. I would also love your review of Informed Choice Radio on iTunes, Stitcher, or anywhere else that you get your podcasts. Visit icradio.co.uk/iTunes or icradio.co.uk/Stitcher. That will take you straight to our pages on those platforms where you can leave your rating and review. Ratings push us higher up the iTunes charts. It helps us to reach more new listeners. Thank you for listening to this episode, and thank you for your continued support of this podcast. Until next time, I've been Martin Bamford, and this has been Informed Choice Radio. And remember, when it comes to your money, the more you know, the faster it can grow.